I'm going to be talking about making work visible. Thank you. Specifically, I'm going to focus on making connections visible, making these integration points visible, these handoffs between different teams, because that is where a lot of invisible work occurs. It's where a lot of fragmentation occurs. Hence the second part here, how to defrag your value stream. When I showed this to my friend, he said, Dominica, if you're going to use the word defrag, you really ought to define what that means for the younger folks in the audience. I do see a few young faces out there. So back in the day, before solid-state drives were a thing, the files on the disk would get, scattered all over, and it made it, the OS had to race around the drive to put the files back together, and it was time-consuming. So we used to have to run this defrag utility, like usually on the weekend, right? And it would help to be able to retrieve those files faster. So when you look at the value stream, if people have to go chasing all around the value stream to get what they need in order to do their job, it consumes a lot of time. And so my point here is that a defrag value stream is going to improve flow. And most of you probably already know that flow is the first way of DevOps, right? In order to deliver value to customers quickly, it requires fast, smooth, predictable flow of work, especially if you work in big companies or your company is growing, because you've got mergers and acquisitions and maybe hundreds or thousands of engineers building dozens or hundreds of different products across dozens of different tools or processes. The work is complex, and as humans, we deal with that by breaking things down into smaller bits of work, and this is how specialization gets introduced, right? The hardest thing we do is communicate across teams. And so that's why I'm talking about these three things today, right? Complexity drives necessary specialization, because the more we scale, the more people, the more complexity we have, the more we need specialized people. But this specialization increases coordination costs across different teams. And then, team A's priority isn't team B's priority, right? And then 3, I want to give you an exercise that you can take back with your team so that you can start to visualize these handoffs, because it's just, frankly, really hard to manage invisible work. When you look at the whole value stream, from ideate to operate, this poor flow, it impacts lead time, or what I like to call flow time, and it makes you unpredictable. So this is a value stream from Barclays that's demonstrating the problem. They're doing really well in dev. They got some DevOps going on in dev. But up front, upstream, there's a monthly triage process. There's a quarterly steering committee review, right? And then they're doing a 12-month budgeting cycle. So if you want to get something done in 2020, you had to submit your budgets by early to mid-2019. Are we really so sure what the financial markets are going to be in this global economy that you know what you need to do a year ahead of time? Right? And then on downstream here, they've got monthly integration and quarterly releases. How can you say that you're agile or DevOps in a situation like this? It doesn't matter how fast dev is going, right? It doesn't matter how fast one part of the value stream is if the bottleneck is in a different place. Okay? And so we really want to look at making these bottlenecks visible. So thing number 1, complexity drives necessary specialization. This is my granddaughter, Kameli. When she was 9, about a year and a half ago, she was seeing 4 different therapists. She's seeing a speech therapist because she can't pronounce G or S, so it's hard for people to understand what she's saying. She's seeing a physical therapist because her balance is off. She can't ride a bicycle. She's seen an occupational therapist because she can't grip a pencil well, and so her handwriting is illegible, and she's just having a really hard time in school. You know, she went to her primary care physician, but they just sort of referred her out to all these different therapists, right? Because the primary physician doesn't know everything there is to know about the human body, right? We need specialists to do that. The thing about this is everywhere she went, she had to fill out the same information on all these different forms. And of course, none of the therapists are talking to each other. And these therapists, it turns out, didn't really help. After a bunch of research, we recognized that Millie's symptoms just ever so slightly mimicked those of a rare form of cerebral palsy. And so it's kind of a long story, but we live in Seattle, but we ended up in Rochester, New York. Millie went to this 5-day intensive clinic. And on day 2, they put on this hand split and a brace, and it sort of held her thumb in place. By day 2, she's writing legibly because function follows form, not the other way around. Any athlete will tell you that, but apparently in the medical field, some of the therapists didn't recognize that. On day 4, a similar occurrence occurred with her speech. Right? Posture makes a big difference with children and their speech. I don't have time to go into that, but my daughter had spent 7 years trying to figure out what the heck was going on with Melly, and we got the IEPs at the school and different speech therapists and help, and not much happened. So 100 years ago, we had 2 medical practitioners. We had a doctor and a nurse. And today there's over 120 medical specialists and subspecialties. Because again, one doctor can't possibly know everything there is to know about the human body. And I think we have a similar thing going on in technology, right? Looking at the world's largest breaches here over the last 15 years, things have just gotten out of control. Yeah, that slide was supposed to scroll up, and you could see over the last 10 years how security breaches have just grown and grown and grown. That slide is from a visualization where the size of the bubbles indicate how many people were impacted, and the color represents the severity. But the whole point is just that there's more security layers and policies that require deep expertise in security, and it increases complexity. And that the complexity of security is resulting in an industry crisis. There is 0% unemployment in cybersecurity. There's an article on Semantic expects the demand in cybersecurity experts to be 6 million this year, and another study shows that gap is going to be 3.5 million by 2021. So I used to work at Corbis. I used to do configuration management. I did that for many years. I used to do builds and source code control and branching and merging strategies and build and deployment automation and release management. And we'd do these releases, and something would go wrong, and so we'd scramble to put a hot fix together, and that hot fix would go into production. And because we'll fix it better later, right? We'll fix it better later. But you get the release in production, and then everybody moves on. They move on to their next project. And there is no incentive for a project manager to fix technical debt in their project. Not in my project, right? It's actually one big reason why managing work by product over project is gaining huge momentum right now. So we'd have a hot fix in our system in place for months. And then you'd have another crisis that would happen, and you'd need to get a hot fix out for the 12-month-old hot fix that was still in production. As Josh Corman likes to say, code is in production much longer than it was ever intended. And it's reasons like that I Am the Calvary efforts are in high demand. So I Am the Calvary, anybody know I Am the Calvary, Josh Corman's group? So their work is a focus on the intersection of computer security and human safety. So an example of their work is reducing life-threatening situations from hackable devices, like infusion pumps that get put into humans in hospitals that allow cyber attackers to take remote control of it. So Josh Corman's team on the Calvary was written up in the January issue of Time magazine. It turns out that the FDA and the Department of Homeland Security shut it down because of Eye on the Calvary. So clearly, there's a critical need for deep security experts. But according to this DevSecOps community survey, developers don't have time to do security. Right? How many of you have time to work on security? I don't see a lot of hands going up. And not all devs want to do security. According to this survey, 20% saying, not my job. I mean, like primary care physicians, developers don't have the bandwidth to know everything there is to know about the whole stack. Right? It's hard enough to stay current in your own area of expertise. 15 years ago, we had one security person. Right? And now here we got the top 10 cybersecurity roles. So the bigger your company grows, the more specialization. I mentioned this big movement going from project to product, and here's the book on it by Mick Kirsten, was just released a few months ago. Okay, thing number 2, specialization increases coordination costs. Let's go back to the medical analogy. If you look at the healthcare delivery roadmap, there's all these specialists you go to. If you've got a heart condition, your primary care physician sends you to the lab to get some blood work, and then you got to go back to your primary care physician, and then they send you to a cardiologist, and maybe you got to go to a pharmacy to pick up blood thinners or whatever, and then they say, well, you're really overweight, you need to go see a dietitian, and then a physical therapist. And everywhere you go, you got to fill out a new form with the same information because nobody's talking, it's not integrated. You got to run around the value stream to get the job done, right? It talk about duplicate entry. This is like duplicate entry times 6. And there's no holistic big picture view of the whole patient. Right? The burden lies on the parent or the individual to do all this communication between the teachers and the doctors and the therapists and all the specialists. And there is a cost to this. So my mom has a healthcare issue, and she was checked into the hospital because she had to get this adenosine heart stress test. And the doctor's specific orders, no caffeine before the test, 24 hours before the test. So we're there, it's the morning, and the nurse gives my mom coffee. Probably because my mom is absolutely impossible in the morning without her double latte, caramel, whatever. And so she has to spend a whole other night in the hospital, which is not the cheapest place to spend a night. She makes it through the next morning, remarkably without any coffee, and they wheel her down into the nuclear tech part of the hospital, where the pharmacy tech hands the nuclear medicine tech the wrong stuff. So once again, she can't complete the task because instead of the heart tracker injection that the doctor ordered, my mom got shot up with a bone tracker. So because things happen in threes, I said, Mom, we got to get out of here. This is just not the safest place to be. And it's true. There's a Johns Hopkins study in the US. Medical errors are the 3rd leading cause of death, over 250,000 a year. I did a little bit of research on Canada. Canada is much better, no surprise there. But in 2014, there is still a problem though, because preventable medical errors, according to this study, killed 30,000 Canadians in 2014, right? More than stroke or diabetes. Now, if we look on the IT side, we'll see these software delivery roadmaps, and they can appear organized when looking at a hierarchical view like this, where the portfolio level's up here, and it breaks down into a program level, and then it breaks down again, and it spreads out and across the different teams. But the details can get lost as work breaks out into smaller bits, right? Especially when handoffs and unknown dependencies occur, these integration points between the different teams. So I was showing this to a friend, and she says, well, but we have full stack engineers. They know everything. They're supposed to know. They're supposed to be able to do everything. So we started looking into this. You know, you're doing DevOps, you build it, you run it, right? So that means you need full stack engineers, right? Well, if you look at Stack Overflow's survey showing developers who consider themselves full stack engineers, it grew from 29% in 2013 to 52% in 2019. How many full stack engineers in the room? Okay. So we started asking, what exactly is the stack these days? What does that even mean? Like, how far down, how far up does it really go? And as we started looking at full stack engineer job descriptions, and then we looked back at the Stack Overflow data, we came to the hypothesis that the probability is fairly high that there's not a lot of folks that are really doing all of these things. This is a job description that we pulled off of Skills Gigs. Right? And those who are doing all these things, there's probably not very many available because most of them are probably at Netflix. Right? So, I mean, if you think about it, say you've got a new job, you're trying to come up to speed on all the domain knowledge. Maybe they're starting to implement Kubernetes, not the easiest thing to start learning, right? If you're learning Kubernetes, do you really have time to go learn Clojure at the same time, or Big O notation, or whatever else you need to learn, right? A decision to do A is a decision to delay B, right? I mean, the brain cognitively can only hold so much. Right? We really can't do it all at the same time. Just like medical practitioners don't have the time to study and know everything, you know, engineers have a hard time too, right? But the costs are high because people try. So real quick here, the Maslach burnout inventory assessment is considered the gold standard for measuring burnout. And burnout's talked a lot about in the DevOps community right now, so I'm not going to go into detail on this. Just want to point out the definition here for burnout. We're really talking about lost energy, lost enthusiasm, and lost confidence. Right. If you, so there's a couple links here, and I'll give you a link to this deck right after my talk. Dr. Christina Maslach spoke at the DevOps Enterprise Summit in Vegas last year, and there's a link to her video here. And also, you can go to her website and you can take the burnout test yourself or get it for your team. Number 3, I want to give you an exercise that you can take home with your teams because, you know, if you don't deal with the complexity and the specialization, trying to keep your company afloat against this competition over the next 5 years is going to be hard. In healthcare, we're seeing lots of disruption right now. Like MyChart, which is a secure online access to medical records, trying to keep everything in one place. We're seeing places like Livongo, which is a whole person platform. They're looking at the whole person, not just looking at individual parts of the whole person. And then Amazon's in the game with their Comprehend Medical, where they're just improving medical language processing with machine learning. They're trying to reduce time to process documentation. You know, things that used to take hours are now taking seconds for cancer patients. My first job out of university, I was doing builds on IBM mainframes. So we were working with assembly language, JCL, C, and COBOL. Right? Now, this is ZB Labs' periodic table of DevOps tools. We've got over 120 DevOps tools. And in DevOps, we're saying, let people use the tool of their choice to do their job. Okay? But the reality of the situation is that everybody's busy working with their team and their own tool. right? And each team's using a different tool. And if they're not integrated, then people have different views of the world. So if you're in quality management, my view of the world might be quality center. If I'm in service management, my view of the world is probably something like ServiceNow. If I'm working in portfolio management, my view of the world might be something like PlanView. And if I'm a developer, my view of the world might be something like Jira or TFS. And each team is only seeing their slice of the value stream. The big picture is missing. So we constantly have to translate this in order to get our story straight. And often that's done via manual handoffs, spreadsheets, emails, and status meetings. There is a value stream. We all have a value stream, but often we don't give it the attention. We don't design it or architect it in the way that we architect our projects. And then tool fights break out because people refuse to use other tools. Development argues that ops should be using Jira. Ops is arguing that developers should be using ServiceNow. And we see this on the business side too. I was working with a sales ops team, and I said, where does your work come from? What is your work intake process? And they said, well, it comes in email. Okay, well then what do? Well, then we copy the stuff in the email into Jira, because we use Jira for our workflow. Okay, well then what happens? Well, we email it back to the salesperson, because they're using Salesforce. Like, they hate Jira. They're not going to use Jira. They're using Salesforce. And so emails go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and the information gets lost, and the details and the communication and collaboration gets delayed. Things take too long is a universal problem. So we got this poll for you. Whip out your phone, bring out a browser, go to menti.com. Menti.com. And punch in this 6-digit code and answer this question. How do you communicate information between team upstream from you or downstream from you? Menti.com, 481065 is a 6-digit code. And then can we display that, please? Slack and email. Oh, email, Slack, email, Jira. Just give you like another 5 seconds. Jira is coming out on top, barely. All right. A lot of different ways people are communicating. Okay, thank you. Take a picture of this real quick if you want, because this is why things take too long in your organization. Because all these different silos and functional teams have to do this in order to communicate so work can get through the value stream. All right. So I want to give you this exercise. It's an experiment, really. It's a way to visualize problems that occur during handoffs as work is flowing across the value stream. There is a process. Everybody has a process. And like Deming says, are you in control of your process, or is your process in control of you? So what we do here is we invite people to identify their handoffs across the value stream. At least start somewhere. Even if you can't do the whole full-blown value stream mapping thing, that costs a lot of money, takes a lot of time. You can't try and bring the team downstream from you and the team upstream from you. The people who are actually doing the work, like hands on the keyboard. I like to start with production because that's the biggest risk, right? And how does a production incident arrive? And so we ask a bunch of questions. We want to know if an incident arrives, but even after it gets mitigated, if it needs developer input, how does that happen? How do developers attend to those? Does an SRE ping a developer through an internal chat channel? We asked people, and they said, well, it just shows up in Jira. The devs look in the backlog and the security issue is just there. Like some people have no idea where their work originates from. It could be that Bob runs a security scan in White Hat, and then Chris exports it manually, and then Jessica imports it manually into Jira. Right? So this example helps teams see how work flows, how it's related to each other, and then how it ties back to the release pipeline. And then where do devs work at it at? And where do changes get checked in? Are you using Git, GitHub, GitLab? So I did this exercise with a financial services company just 2 weeks ago. They had a network capacity expansion issue in production. So what happened? Well, this incident came in, it went into ServiceNow, then somebody got paged on pager duty, there was a conference call, they were able to mitigate it, to solve the immediate problem. But then they recognized, we need to increase the bandwidth. We need to, instead of 5 gigabyte circuits, we need 10 gigabyte now. And so the whole rest of this view is what it takes this network engineering team to get bigger circuits. So first they create a change, they have a meeting, the meeting notes end up in Word, it's entered into Epic on Jira board number 1. Then it gets split into multiple parallel processes with emails and meetings to all these different impacted teams. Because the circuit team, they need finance approvals, right? For circuit orders, they need to do invoicing and inventory records that need to get updated. There's more meetings and more emails and stories get created on Jira board number 2. And then the change order gets submitted, it has to be validated. Then there's this authorization and peer review. And then it has to go to CAB. It has to get approval from the change approval board. And it sits there and waits on CAB. Eventually it gets scheduled. So something that could really probably take a couple of hours takes 6 weeks. The senior VP of Operations and Engineering was in the room when we did this. So if you do this, it's great to have some leadership in the room. And we just, people were just saying, well, then I do this. Well, but wait a minute, we got to do this first, right? People had no idea that the team just upstream from them had to do all this stuff. The VP's jaw was dropped in horror at what it took to fix this technical debt. So it's an experiment for you to go try. If we've got business people on the end, on the others in the room, then we can do this whole thing again with, well, how does work come in on the business side? How does work arrive that way? And I'm running a little bit short on time, so I'm going to sort of skip over this part. This is all documented. It's called the Value Stream Canvas exercise. You can use it to find out how you and your team fit into the value stream. I co-authored this with my good friend Carmen Diardo. It's a short companion piece to Mick Kirsten's Project to Product book. It's a way for you to see how people are running around the value stream trying to get their job done. The benefits have been transformative from my observation, because making connections visible, it helps different teams become aware of mutually critical information sooner. So just like Cirque du Soleil trapeze artists have synchronized handoffs, so should your value stream. If you would like a copy of this deck, please send an email to dominica@sendyourslides.com. Please put flow in the subject, and I'll send you a copy of the presentation and a bunch of other stuff, including excerpts of my book, Making Work Visible. And yes, I did bring more no, less whip stickers. And I plan to propose an open space session on this topic, so I'll have stickers there if you'd like. Thank you so much.